Mary Johnson, an Indigenous woman, went missing nearly a year ago. While the FBI It's been nearly 10 months since Johnson was reported missing. A billboard on Interstate 5 and local media coverage have yielded few credible tips, and tribal police have yet to make an arrest in the case. Only last week did the FBI announce it would offer a reward of up to $10,000 for information about Johnson's disappearance. While family members and advocates welcome the move, they also wonder what took so long. Too often, that means families like Johnson's are left waiting without answers. Johnson's disappearance remains unsolved. There's a lot unknown about the circumstances under which Johnson disappeared last year. At the time Johnson disappeared, she and her husband weren't in a good place, Sally said. She was staying mostly with friends, returning to the couple's shared house every few days to pick up her mail and take a shower before heading out again.
On November 24th, a day before she was last seen, Sally said her estranged husband dropped her off with a suitcase at a friend's house on the Tulalip Reservation. Johnson stayed there overnight, and planned the next day to head to the house of a couple she knew in Oso about 30 miles away. The friend she was staying with was supposed to give her a ride to a nearby church, where someone else would pick her up and take her to the couple's house in Oso. A second man, who had been staying at the same house as Johnson, wanted a ride, too. But things went awry on November 25th, and Sally said Johnson's friend backtracked on the offer to give her and the second man a ride. Johnson set out toward the church on foot around 1:30 p.m. and the second man also started walking away from the house. A third man who was set to pick Johnson up at the church and take her to Oso eventually drove by and saw her walking on Fire Trail Road with the man who also wanted a ride, Sally said. He indicated he only had enough room in his vehicle for one person and kept on going, ultimately declining to give her a ride. The man who was supposed to pick Johnson up from the church reportedly told police that he hadn't seen or heard from her since November 25th. The man who had been walking with her said the two went their separate ways and that he'd had no sign of her either. On December 9, 2020, Johnson's estranged husband reported her missing. In the nearly 10 months since, there has been little movement in the investigation, which Sally said remains open and active. He said the police department had identified multiple persons of interest, though it has yet to make an arrest. Because a body hasn't been recovered, Sally said it's difficult to establish the probable cause necessary to seek specific search warrants. Because Johnson's disappearance was reported weeks after the fact, he said surveillance footage or precise location information that could offer clues has likely been overridden. And because authorities don't know for sure whether Johnson disappeared on or off the reservation, he said it's unclear whether they can leverage federal grand jury subpoena powers or not. We don't know if she was kidnapped, held against her will, if she has been murdered. It could be argued maybe she just wandered off in the woods and got lost. Maybe she overdosed and passed away somewhere in a remote area and we don't know where she's at. Maybe she's just hiding, maybe she's in treatment, Sally said. There's a lot of maybes. Authorities are often slow to act, advocates say to advocates who work on the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. However, such challenges and uncertainties come off as excuses. Abigail Echohawk, Chief Research Officer for the Seattle Indian Health Board and an enrolled member of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma, says one of the primary barriers in addressing this crisis is the maze of jurisdiction in Indian country. Cases of missing Indigenous women are often mired in bureaucracy, with prosecutors and law enforcement having to establish whether the authority rests with the federal government, the state or the tribe. The time it takes to determine the jurisdiction of a case can ultimately affect whether those women live or die, she said. Another piece of the problem, as some advocates see it, is that Indigenous women are often blamed for their own disappearances, resulting in a lack of empathy for victims from authorities and the general public. They are assumed to have been killed, murdered, or disappeared. They're assumed to have run away, to have had substance abuse issues, to have done something that caused them to go missing or to be murdered, Echo Hawk said. Those attitudes only perpetuate the problem and make it easier for perpetrators to avoid accountability, Lucchesi said. That kind of narrative about Indigenous people just lends itself to more violence, so that when this violence does happen, it's not a disruption of the social fabric the way it would be when it happens to somebody else, she said. Because we're already perceived as not part of the social fabric, because we're either dead and disappeared. We're less than human. We're so far away on some remote reservation that we're not part of the rest of the community. The full scale of the problem is unknown. The numbers that do exist are likely an undercount, in part because Indigenous women and girls are sometimes misclassified as white, Hispanic, or Asian. Adding to the data problem is a historic distrust of law enforcement by Indigenous communities, which can lead some cases to go unreported. About 1,500 missing persons cases of American Indian and Alaskan Native people have been recorded across the U.S. by the National Crime Information Center, while approximately 2,700 homicide cases have been reported to the federal government's Uniform Crime Reporting Program. A database maintained by Lucchesi's Sovereign Bodies Institute puts the count higher, with more than 4,500 cases of missing Indigenous women and girls dating back to the 1900s, she said. There are 9 such cases just in her own family, Lucchesi said. That shadow of death is always there, she added. That's why advocates are pushing leaders and policymakers to do something about the issue.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.